Welcome back to the final hour of a Tuesday edition of the Gary Sutton Show here on News Radio 910 WSBA. If you go to a website called CurtSmithUSA.com, there's a little line at the top, and it says, Curt Smith is among America's leading authorities on politics and sports. NBC broadcaster Bob Costas says, quote, Curt stands up for the beauty of words, unquote. USA Today adds, he shows that broadcasting can be art. And he is an award-winning national public radio affiliate commentator, Gatehouse media columnist, former presidential speechwriter for President George H.W.Bush, and best-selling author. And he joins us here this morning, probably the best baseball author in the country. I'm going to say that. I'll put the heat on him. But he comes back to our show this morning. Curt, always great to have you on the show. Good morning to you.
Well, good morning to you, and great to be with you as always.
Curt, before we get started on, baseball and politics and what you're seeing around the world right now, Robin Williams died last night, and Bob Costa said, you stand up for the beauty of words. Here was a guy that I thought probably took words and made us laugh at them, maybe better than anybody else. What were your thoughts about Robin Williams and the kind of humor as an actor and maybe as a comedian he brought to the stage?
Well, I think he used words beautifully, but I also think within the ambience of language, that is that he put them in a proper context and he adorned them in a comic guise to an extent probably better than anyone of our time. He had a great timing. I think he did. For television timing, what Jack Benny did for radio, in a sense that he had his shtick, and I use that not in a pejorative, but in a very praiseful way. And he succeeded, really, when you think about it, in the very varied platforms of television, from Mork and Mindy, which is where I think I discovered him, and I think probably the vast majority of your audience did, and of course Saturday Night Live, and the many movies that he made, and the many comedy series that he starred within. So I think to go at 63 in any event is entirely too soon, and certainly in the way that he went is entirely too soon, magnified several-fold.
I've always enjoyed when talking to you about you always have a way of turning a phrase, and you have this spontaneous moment where there's a lot of thought that goes into it, and yet it seems to be compact into a moment. And I kind of thought that a little bit about Robin Williams too, that the spontaneity that he would deal with things and make them funny in a moment, and the quickness of turning a phrase that you maybe hadn't even thought about, yet it was very funny, is something that's very special, I think, that we admire.
Well, I think that I'm trying to remember who said it. Perhaps Hemingway said it first. You don't think of him necessarily as a funny person, but he said one of the great commandments of public speaking is to be funny on command, and that is very difficult to be, I think, in public life. We think of many comedians, and we don't know whether they are funny on command or whether their humor writers are funny on command. Ronald Reagan, for example, had many wonderful humor writers. A good friend of mine is a wonderful writer for him, or was for him, by the name of Doug Gamble, and he wrote many of Reagan's best lines as president. And but yet, Gamble would say that he never had to make Reagan funny on command. He already was. So that, for example, he would, in the 1984 campaign, you will remember, I think, in the first debate where Reagan did not perform up to par and provoked the issue of age, and people wondered if Reagan was still up to the job. And in that second debate, came up with the immemorial line, the greatest line, funny or not, in the history, I believe, of television debate, where he said that he was not going to make an issue in this campaign. He was not going to make, for example, an issue of his opponent's youth and inexperience.
Right.
Meaning Walter Mondale, and you could see Mondale. He was roaring with the rest of the crowd, and it was laughter mixed with tears, because even Mondale knew at that point that the campaign was over. That was a magnificent line, but it was Reagan's line, and it was doubtless Reagan may have thought about it, but the inspiration was his, and I think that was precisely the case with Robin Williams.
Yeah, and just going to be missed. That kind of humor doesn't come along that often. And I think I was telling some people this morning, I remember reading there, he was a good friend of Jonathan Winters, who had that same kind of ability to be in the moment and make it funny.
Well, it was an impish kind of humor, and not at all malicious, but rather quite benign, almost childlike in that sense. And I think that we have lost so much of that. All the great comics, in my view, had an impish quality, a childlike, a benign kind of quality. No one got hurt. They would poke fun at themselves. I remember Jack Benny saying that he would retire before he would tell a blue joke, meaning a profane joke or an obscene joke, which would mean that Benny would have retired about 40 years ago, in the culture of today, which in essence he did. And I think that Winters was the same thing. And he didn't have to. He had such a dowry of talent, a ministry of talent, if you would, that he didn't have to tell a dirty joke. Now, I'm sure, given the culture of today, that, and I know, in fact, that people do, and all the comics do, and yet to have the kind of talent that was extinguished yesterday, I think is doubly sad.
I want to move over to politics for a moment. I also want to touch on baseball with you a little bit today too. But you've been in the White House. You've been in there during crises. You had to write speeches, but you were around the attitude. Many people today uncomfortable. We look around the world, and there's not a place that we see right now where it seems to be tranquil at all. In fact, just the opposite. We look, for example, at Iraq the last several weeks especially, and Americans are sitting there hearing about people that want to come plant the flag of ISIS at the White House. Yeah. We're watching what they're doing, the horrible things they're doing to people.
Right.
And the way we're dealing with them now seems to be so much more, I hate to use the word indecisive, but that's exactly where we are. You've dealt with it in the past. How much different is it now than where it was before when you were dealing with it, let's say, in the administration of President George H.W.Bush?
Well, I would use the term night and day, but even that would understate the case. You use the term a presidency that is in a crisis, and it is true that all presidencies experience crises, but this presidency is a crisis, and has been so really, Gary, since the beginning of the presidency. This presidency is a disgrace. It is un-American in every sense of the term. You have a president that really doesn't like this country very much, that doesn't like to defend this country very much, that is not interested in the tradition, the history, the glory, the lineage, the heritage of this country very much, that doesn't think of himself in the long line of a Washington, a Jefferson, a Kennedy, a Reagan very much. Then this is hilarious given how inferior he is as a president, but who actually thinks that he is superior to predecessors that have come before him, when in fact he is by far the worst president in the modern history of the American presidency. And that's not just me, as we've talked about before. A Gallup poll recently said, and a Quinnipiac poll affirms as much. They say that Americans consider him, Obama, the worst president in the modern history of the presidency, by far, eclipsing even George W.Bush, for whom many thought that feat would be impossible. But he has achieved it, and he's achieved it on merit. He is the worst president. You can't go to one country around the world and find one that has a greater respect for America than we did when he took office. You can't go around the world and find one country that has a greater if you would, esteem for the United States, or has more fear for the United States, or has a greater understanding of what this country would do in a crisis, because all we know for sure is that we will react with timidity, and we will react with fear, because that's what this country stands for today. The country that developed the bomb, and that won World War II, and that stormed the beaches at Normandy, and that sent men to the moon. That country today is a pygmy when it comes to respect around the world, because its president is a pygmy. And This is what some of us and people like you particularly said would happen. But I think even on our worst days and our worst projections of the President of the United States, none of us could have imagined a president so small and so malignant and so disgusting and so unrepresentative of what this country is as this pathetic representative and misrepresentative of the United States of America.
Curt, have you been able to put your finger on, obviously you have some very strong feelings about it, but have you been able to put your finger on...
Yeah, but they're representative
No, I understand. A lot of people are feeling exactly that way, and that's what I was asking about. But point being... Why? Why the lack of respect for the United States? Why the lack of respect for the customs, the history, the objectives of this country? Why?
By him?
Yes.
Because he has contempt for the United States. We go back to the Cultural War, which Pat Buchanan predicted at the 1992 Republican Convention, and he was right. What Richard Nixon predicted and talked about when he won 49 states in 1972 by defending Middle America on one side of the Cultural War versus the counterculture. The counterculture won Massachusetts, the People's Republic of, and Nixon won 49 states for the good people of Middle America. But the counterculture then has become the reigning culture now. And the people who hated America then and who were waving the Vietnamese flag and who were hoping that Americans would be killed in the Vietnam War and who had no respect for the heroes who had won World War II and who were snobs and who were anarchists and who had been given everything by their parents and who had no respect for the country that had given them everything. Those disgusting excuses for children coming to be adults then now rule the United States as elites today. And they have made of the United States a pale representative of what the United States once was. And they hate the country which has given them everything that one could hope to receive.
I don't think I've ever heard that explanation of it made as well as you've made it. What should be done today in Iraq? What about a minute and a half left in this segment. I want to go to a little happier things in our final 5-minute segment. Yeah. But what should be done today from your perspective? What would a George H.W. Bush have done, or maybe even a Ronald Reagan as another example?
Well, I can tell you 3 years ago they would have kept a contingent of 15 to 20 to 25,000 troops in Iraq, as every president and every war has done at the end of a war. Win, lose, or draw, from Korea to the Middle East to Vietnam, to make sure that peace has a chance, to make sure the representative government has a chance, to make sure that America has a voice, to bring about the democratic ideals that Obama insipidly talks about now. Well, he can talk until he's blue in the face, but the point of the matter is we have no voice because we have no troops, and so we have no machinery, except that the other side has all of our machinery that was left there when America left. So what we do is really now to be put in terms of what we did. We did the wrong thing, and now we have almost no chance to do the right thing.
Curt, we're going to take a break. When we come back, you're also known as one of the greatest baseball voices in the country and one of the best baseball writers. I want to ask you about a few new things in baseball this year and talk a little bit about that as well. Curt Smith will be right back with us here on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show here on News Radio 910. Yes, it is WSBA, and we're with Curt Smith, who, in addition to having been a speechwriter for President George H.W. Bush, also is a great baseball writer. You always have a great book out there, and I hate to bring up baseball right now because I know I think I'm correct in saying you're a pretty good Red Sox fan, right?
Yes, and I've got the scars to show. It's
Well, defending champions, but not where you want to be. See, Orioles fans, and we are an Orioles station, and I am a big Orioles fan, watched them shellac the Yankees last night, which can never be too much, 11-3.
Yeah.
So they've not switched places. The Orioles have been building the last few years under Buck Showalter, but a happy time for Orioles fans, maybe not so happy for Red Sox fans. And yet, one of the things that you really get into, the voices and the feelings about the game in places like Fenway Park that we celebrate.
Yeah.
There's something about baseball that really kind of corresponds with daily, what should I say, coincides, with daily life here in our country. What do you find in baseball that is so intriguing for you?
Well, it's a fact of life rather than an event, so that you take it from day to day, and it becomes part of day to day. So that when there's a baseball strike, for example, you feel it more than you do a football or even a hockey strike, because those sports aren't played day to day. They're played twice or once a week, and you may not watch a game. You may be looking at a book or cleaning the house while a game is on, but it's background music. It's a lovely part of the fabric of summer. And I've often asked the rhetorical question: what's the most distinctive voice or sound rather of summer in the United States?
Yeah.
And the answer, I think, is play-by-play on the radio, because you can go to the beach, and I often have on Maryland's lovely beaches, or when I was in D.C., or you can go in the backyard, or you can be driving in a convertible if you're lucky enough to have one down the road, or you can be going walking down the street or down the street, if you're lucky, you'll hear play-by-play from a dozen different directions, and it's a unifying sense in the summer. And boy, the Oriole fans have been so lucky over the years, because I believe, and I've written that Oriole fans probably have the most riveting and lovely litany of broadcasters, of voices, of any team in the American League, and possibly with baseball, beginning with Chuck Thompson, who embodied and still does in memory baseball, I think, to Baltimore. John Miller said once to me, he said, "I don't care what Chuck says as long as Chuck says it," which really says it all. So you had Chuck, and you had Bill O'Donnell, and you had Ernie Harwell, and you had of course
Miller was there. It was unbelievable.
Miller was there, and so were his voices that he gave, because he was a marvelous mimic.
Oh.
He could mimic Vin Scully, and he could mimic him in Chinese and Japanese and Spanish and English. So you got 4 for the price of 1.
And John Miller had a chance to actually sit in the box one night and film a little TV show, but I had a chance to talk to him, and he was the greatest guy during a rain delay you'd ever want to have, because he could come up with stories that were just incredible, and it had nothing to do with baseball many times, but would always come back to baseball at the end somehow.
That's right. Wade Hoyt was a marvelous voice of the Cincinnati Reds for 25 years, and when he retired, they did an LP record, and it was simply entitled Wade Hoyt in the Rain, and it was a compendium of stories that he had told during Reds rain delays. And the best baseball broadcasters are storytellers.
Yes.
Because the game revolves around stories. It doesn't revolve around balls and strikes. So anyway, the O's have had, Bill O'Donnell was terrific, and today's Joe Angel, and of course Fred Manfra and Gary Thorne, and I hope I haven't omitted.
No, you don't think you have. Gary Thorne is really, really good.
I'm sure I have, and I don't wish to, but you mentioned the Red Sox, and last year was an unexpected and riveting, stunning, spectacular. They were not a good team. Somehow a miracle occurred, and they won the world title. This year, they having gone from worst to first, now they've gone from first to worst, and they're giving schizophrenia a new connotation. So this is the only team that could be eliminated from the pennant race before the season began. Every fan has what I call a second team, and the second team is the team that you adopt once your team is out of contention. Well, my team was out of contention by March 15th, so I adopted the Orioles, and that's not hard, because my hometown is Rochester. The Red Wings of Rochester were the Orioles AAA farm team for about 35 to 40 years. My late dad was an Orioles fanatic. I was at Camden Yards when Camden Yards opened, because my boss, George Bush, the 41st, opened Camden Yards.
I was there that day as well. Yep.
Yeah, and he knew I loved baseball, so he had me tag along, and he bounced the ball on one hop to the catcher, and I asked him, he's such a great baseball player. I said, well, Mr. President, what happened to your throwing arm? He said, well, I have to wear this. I have to wear this steel vest. And then he would always use that as an excuse. But then when he left the presidency, he didn't have to wear the vest anymore, and yet he was still bouncing the ball on one hop. But I didn't ask him. Why. I respected the power of the office. But in any event, he's a great baseball fan. But the Orioles, I am so happy that they have become a contender once again, because anybody who has ever gone to Camden Yards knows that it's a temple of baseball. What Larry Lucchino did with Camden Yards, he should be send them to Cooperstown COD, because he belongs there.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 ballparks have been built since then, and they've all tried to be Camden Yards. They failed, but they've come close. Camden Yards' importance is incalculable. And to see it packed again, and to see Baltimore talking baseball, and to see the crowds going nuts, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. You don't even have to be an Oriole fan to appreciate what Baltimore means to baseball.
It's really interesting. My wife's a little younger than I am, and we were sitting there watching the Orioles, and they just have been, I think they've scored 12, 10, 11
against
runs in the last 4 games. Yeah. And so I said, it was bases loaded, and I went, FOB. And she said, what's that? I said, full of birds. And I said,
That's right.
Everywhere you look, an Oriole. Chuck Thompson's one of his favorite lines, and also gave us Go to War, Miss Agnes, and Ain't the Beer Cold. And all those. And I said, the words that you remember from all the years, it goes back to what you said earlier, those are the stories and the words and the phrases that you remember, and it's fun to kind of bring them back every now and then. Final thought in your part, Curt.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and what I like as well, even though I haven't seen them yet, are the statues the Orioles
they're great,
have erected. And which is exactly right, because the Orioles' lineage, the history of Hall of Famers is really enormously impressive. And they came to Baltimore in '54. It seems like they've been since 1854.
Right.
And since the parade that came down, I'm trying to think, Charles Street, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Vice President Nixon was a huge baseball fan himself. Led the parade, and they've had such a place in baseball prominence ever since.
Well, it's been fun talking with you about baseball, about politics, and about even Robin Williams this morning. Curt, always a pleasure, and I can't wait till our next time.
Anytime, Gary. You bet.
Thank you. Take care, my friend.
Thank you. Yep.
Curt Smith with us here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA.